Hi there, my name is Leslie Hiquiana, and this is my thesis defense presentation submitted in partial fulfillment of the requirements for the degree of Master of Science from the Rehabilitation Institute at SIU Carbondale. Today I'm going to walk you through my thesis, examining the effectiveness of choice and task sequence for children with autism. Autism spectrum disorder now affects 1 in every 68 children. This is a drastic increase from 2000, where rates of autism diagnoses were 1 in 150. It's certainly more common to see children with autism receiving specialized services within school buildings rather than being isolated. Doing so allows them to partake in typical school activities and experiences. Behavior analysis is an evidence-based practice that is widely used when working with children with autism. ABA can be integrated into public school settings through a range of interventions. When investigating special ed teachers, Fennell and Dellenberger found that most teachers in Ireland working with children with autism have very little knowledge in behavior analysis. This is a problem and describes the need for more applied research that educators can implement immediately. Bannerman and colleagues argued that individuals with disabilities have the right to choose and refuse. In fact, these are some basic personal liberties. It can be argued that choice may interfere with the right to habilitation, such as choosing the right foods to eat, the best activities to partake in, and the best therapies to choose. In contrast, decision-making should be fostered in order to prepare individuals to partake in their community. Choice interventions have been studied for a number of years. Research has been published attempting to explain the reinforcing properties of choice. Some researchers argue that matching law and histories of differential reinforcement explain the preference for choice. In contrast, Kern and colleagues propose that choice may be reinforcing in and of itself. Regardless, choice has proven to be a successful intervention across a wide variety of individuals and settings. Let's review a few. Rispoli, Lang, Neely, Camargo, Hutchins, Davenport, and Goodwin conducted a comparison of with and across activity choices in order to reduce problem behavior for children with autism. They specifically recruited participants diagnosed with autism that demonstrated severe problem behavior and whose behavior was identified to be maintained by escape. 2 conditions were used, choice and no choice. They were examined using a reversal design with alternating treatments embedded into the treatment phase. Results indicated that overall participants engaged in less challenging behavior during both across activity and within activity conditions. This extends upon previous literature, but researchers indicate that there are some clear limitations. The findings are only applicable for a specific population in a specific setting. Additionally, they speculated that choice may work for these participants since their challenging behavior is maintained by escape. Utilizing choice provides an opportunity to escape. Kern, Montagna, Vordran, Balin, and Hilt utilized choice of task sequence to avoid escaping necessary tasks. They had an interesting pool of participants. They used 2 girls, Kelly and Shannon, who had diagnoses of mental retardation, and a typically functioning boy named Danny, who was diagnosed with ADHD. A reversal design was used, and they found that Danny had a very stark contrast between choice and no choice conditions, whereas Shannon and Kelly produced lower problem behavior, but differences were not as drastic. In a similar study, Ramsey, Jolivet, Patterson, and Kennedy examined how choice and task sequence influenced time on task, time completion, and accuracy. They utilized 5 adolescents with emotional and behavioral disorders located in a residential facility. All sessions were conducted in a school within the facility using academic materials. A reversal design was used to examine choice and task sequence compared to no choice. During the choice condition, participants were permitted to choose which tasks to complete first and second. During no choice, the teacher assigned tasks to complete. Results from the study indicate that choice and task sequence is successful for individuals with EDB. It improved time on task, time completion, and accuracy was improved for 4 out of 5 students. Similar to Rispoli and colleagues, more research is needed to examine other areas of generalization. A social validity survey was conducted across participants and teachers, and they found the intervention was determined to be easily implemented, and the participants requested it again. The purpose of my study is to expand upon Ramsey and colleagues' findings by applying choice and task sequence to children with autism in a school setting. Additionally, I added multiple levels of choice and task sequence, full student choice, partial student choice, and teacher choice, in order to conduct a parametric analysis of choice and task sequence. At the end, I evaluated the social validity of the investigation by assessing for preference amongst conditions. Participants were recruited from a Chicagoland suburban elementary school. All participants were familiar with the research in the experimental setting. 3 male students were recruited. Participant 1 was 9 years old, diagnosed with autism and ADHD. He scored out of the VB map and was reading at a kindergarten level. Participant 2 was 10 years old and diagnosed with autism and Fragile X syndrome. He scored a 97 on the VB map, demonstrating deficits in social skills, listening and responding by function feature in class. Participant 3 was 10 years old and diagnosed with autism. He scored a 131 on the VB map with difficulties in the areas of intraverbal responses and listener responding by function feature in class. All sessions were conducted in the classroom of the participants. For the purpose of the study, the researcher and the teacher were the same person. All sessions were conducted within the regularly scheduled school day. All students utilized visual schedules to follow a highly structured, predictable day. Throughout the day, they rotate through centers. Centers are a 15-minute time period where students sit one-to-one with an adult to complete an academic or functional task. When a timer goes off, students rotate to a different center. Sessions were conducted during the teacher center, where participants had one-to-one time with the researcher. The teacher center had a table, 4 chairs, and a shelf with various educational materials. The materials used for this investigation ranged across the participants. All tasks were adapted from IEP goals and curriculum work. Tasks were presented via paper pencil, dry erase marker, and laminated worksheets, as well as note cards with sight words or math facts and intraverbal questions. The researcher tracked data via paper and pencil and utilized an auditory interval timer with a single earpiece to avoid distractions. IOA was collected for 33% of sessions for participant 1 and 2, and 36% of sessions for participant 3. Average agreement for participant 1 was 89%, average agreement for participant 2 was 85%, and was 88% for participant 3. The operational definition of on-task behavior was engagement in any behavior for any period of time that matches the ongoing instruction. For each participant, slight specifications were made. Participant 1 was considered not on task if questions and comments were unrelated to the current task. Participant 2 was not on task if he engaged in whining or crying while also completing his work. Participant 3 was considered not on task if he engaged in verbal aggression, as defined within his behavior plan, while also working on his work. A multi-element design was used to examine the differences across the 3 conditions: teacher choice, student choice of sequence, and partial student choice of sequence. Condition-correlated stimuli were used to further differentiate across conditions. Condition-correlated stimuli were different for each participant and were assigned at random. 3 colors were utilized for condition-correlated stimuli: gold, purple, and white. For the teacher choice of sequence condition, participants were seated and told what tasks to complete first, second, and third. This was most comparable to a typical school day. For the student choice of sequence condition, participants were permitted full opportunities of choice. They saw all the tasks, and they were asked what they'd like to complete first, second, and third. And for the partial student choice condition, participants were only permitted to choose the first task. After choosing the first task, participants were told which task to complete second and third. Finally, when preference was evaluated, we did so by presenting condition-correlated stimuli in the form of paper squares. Participants were asked which condition they wanted, and each color square was tapped as the condition was named. Participant 1 demonstrated marginal differences across conditions. He had relatively stable rates of on-task behavior across all 3 conditions. On average, he was on task for 84% of intervals during teacher choice, 87% of intervals for partial student choice, and 85.9% of intervals for student choice. During the preference phase, participant 1 chose student choice of sequence for 100% of opportunities. During this phase, he was on task for an average of 86.7 of the intervals. Participant 2 demonstrated slight differences across conditions. On average, he was on task for 77.2% of intervals during the teacher phase, 78.1% of intervals during the partial student condition, 83.9% of intervals for student choice condition, and during the preference phase, he chose student choice for 100% of opportunities. During this phase, he was on task for an average of 82% of intervals. Participant 3 demonstrated the most variable responding across the three conditions. On average, he was on task for 85.9% of intervals during teacher choice, 82.3% of intervals for partial student choice, and 87% of intervals for student choice. During the preference phase, he chose all three conditions. He chose teacher choice for 17% of opportunities and was on task for 62.5% of intervals. He chose student choice for 50% of opportunities and displayed on-task behavior for 86% of intervals. Partial student choice of sequence was chosen for 33% of opportunities, and on-task behavior was seen for 91% of intervals. Overall, no condition alone established significantly higher trends. Participants 1 and 2 demonstrated relatively stable data across all three conditions. During the preference phase, it was clear that participants 1 and 2 preferred student choice of sequence. While participant 3 chose the other conditions, he demonstrated preference of choice for any type. Previous research established that choice and task sequence can be a successful intervention when seeking to increase on-task behaviors or decrease problem behaviors. Additionally, this is a socially validated intervention for both teachers and participants. According to Bannerman and colleagues, choice making is a right we need to foster. While previous research also shows some discrepancies of participants with mixed abilities, specifically participants with autism demonstrated less significant changes across choice and no choice conditions. Finally, there's limited research regarding a parametric analysis on different levels of choice. That's why the purpose of my current investigation was to examine how choice in a task sequence influences on-task behavior for children with autism in a school setting. Additionally, I conducted a parametric analysis by providing multiple levels of choice in sequence, and finally, I assessed preference across all participants. The results from this examination suggest that choice in task sequence alone does not increase on-task behavior for children with autism. Interestingly, all participants demonstrated preference for choice. Participants 1 and 2 clearly demonstrated preference for full choice, and this has several practical applications. The fact that participants clearly preferred choice and displayed similar rates of on-task behavior during that condition supports the findings of Ramsey and colleagues regarding the social validity of choice interventions. This intervention could easily be integrated into classrooms to practice choice making without hindering academic progress. A major limitation of this study is the fact that it's unclear if conditions were clearly discriminable across all three participants. While participant 1 was observed to comment about the conditions, the other two participants did not. Future research can extend the conditions to ensure each condition is clearly paired with a correlated stimuli. Another limitation is the existence of carryover effect, which explains that each data point is not necessarily independent of one another. Future research may utilize a different design with extended conditions in order to control for this. Furthermore, similar to previous research, the findings here are really specific. It's unclear if this intervention would be feasible or even preferred in a gen ed environment, and more research is needed to examine that application. Additional limitations include ceiling effect. 2 of the 3 participants in the current study maintain relatively stable states of on-task behavior, so more research is required to examine how this intervention influences participants with significant problem behavior. Additionally, it should be noted that during the course of the study, a 3-week interruption period occurred during which spring break and testing happened. During this time, participants were not exposed to any conditions or materials from the investigation. More research is needed to examine the intervention without disruptions. Based on my findings, there's definitely a need to continue research regarding choice and task sequence interventions for individuals with autism. Regardless, I found that providing choice can allow us to foster independence without sacrificing academic progress. Thank you for taking the time to be on my committee and listening to my presentation. Please see my resources here.